All right, Luke, Pat's here, so you can probably get started in about 20 seconds.
Okay, yeah. So you're texting Andy then?
Yep, he got texted 15 seconds ago.
Awesome.
So probably once Pat's video gets on, you can. You good, Pat?
All right. I will call to order the meeting of the Verona Plan Commission for Monday, June 1st, 2020 at 6:33 p.m. First, we'll have the roll.
Commissioner Lytle?
Here.
Commissioner Heinzen?
Here.
Alderperson Cole?
Here.
Commissioner Powers?
Here.
Commissioner Tucker Long?
Here.
Commissioner Hankert?
Here.
Mayor Diaz?
Here. All right, we got a quorum. Great. Next, we'll move on to item 3, which is approval of the minutes from the May 2nd, 2020 Plan Commission meeting. Questions, comments, or motions?
Move approval.
Motion by Alder Cole. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Seconded by Commissioner Powers. Geez. Any corrections on the minutes? Mr. Zaire?
Just to note, the agenda, it said May 2nd. It should have said May 4th. So the actual minutes that were in the packet were correct, but just we had the incorrect date on the agenda. So we're fine approving it. Just wanted to note that for the record.
Gotcha. Oh, that's good to note. Seeing no further corrections, we'll do this by voice vote. All those in favor of improving the minutes from the May 4th, 2020 Plan Commission meeting, say aye.
Aye. Aye. Aye.
Opposed, no? That motion passes. Next, we'll move on to item 4, which is a discussion and possible action regarding a zoning ordinance rewrite and a review of draft Article 3, Article 4, and Article 5. Mr. Stayer.
Thank you. So House of Levine and Ansel Glink are continuing to make progress rewriting the city's zoning and sign ordinance. They've been working with staff to kind of coordinate some of these activities. Jackie Wells of House of Levine is here tonight. I'm going to promote her in a second to a panelist mode so she can provide a brief presentation to the Planning Commission. Tonight we'll be talking about zoning districts, specific district standards, and then also additionally some more zoning district conversation. So what we're looking for tonight is kind of as much feedback or comments you can kind of provide. They continue to work through the process, and the more comments and feedback we can give them, the smoother the process becomes, especially at the end. So with that, as I ramble, I'll be promoting Jackie Wells to the panelist mode, and then she can provide her presentation. Hey,
Hi,
Jackie,
everybody.
so Jackie, you should be able to share your screen. You should have that ability. So with that, if there's not any questions about what I just talked about, I guess I'll turn it over to Jackie.
All right. I think I'm doing it. All right, is everyone able to see my screen?
Yes.
Awesome. All right, let me go full screen here. Okay, so I want to start with, well, thank you guys so much for having me and having this Zoom meeting to go over the first 3 articles that I've been working with staff and our team back in the office on getting ready for you all to review. So it's really the meat of the zoning ordinance. So it's your district standards, you know, what permitted uses and what conditional uses exist within those districts, the dimensional standards. So your setbacks, your height, all of the parts of zoning that people really think of as zoning. So I want to get started with the proposed zoning map. So this is sort of a summary of that first Article 3, where we talk about the changes within those zoning districts. So we are proposing that Verona's 15 zoning districts be revised down to 12. So that includes eliminating the CR Community Residence District, NC Neighborhood Commercial District, UC Urban Commercial District. So this is an overview of the entire proposed zoning map, and we'll go into more detail here. So this is the combination of the CR Community Residential District with the Neighborhood Residential District. So you can see the darker yellow is the CR district. And we're proposing that these two districts be combined since the purpose statement for both districts are vastly similar, and then the development patterns on the ground are also very similar. So the one difference between the two districts was that the community residential district is meant to encourage or promote affordable housing. So we have some other strategies that we are proposing, including accessory dwelling units, and then conditionally allowing attached housing units in this NR district to allow for more housing types to make it more affordable. Are there any questions on the proposed NR district? All right, so we'll move on to the SC district. So we're proposing that the majority of your corridor commercial areas be consolidated to the suburban commercial district. So you have these areas spread out between 3 different districts currently, including the neighborhood commercial, suburban commercial, and urban commercial districts. We're proposing that these all be consolidated into the suburban commercial district to better regulate those auto-oriented corridor commercial uses. Any questions on the SC? All right. Now going down to the CC district. So this is your downtown district as it's defined in your downtown plan. I think it was a downtown and transportation plan. So this would consolidate all of those varying districts, the NR, MR, UR, NC, CC, UC, NO, PI, all of these districts that have these varying regulations will all get consolidated into the proposed CC district to make sure that the downtown is really developing the way you all are envisioning it in the downtown plan. Any questions on the CC? All right. So this map just summarizes all of those proposed rezonings. So it'd be a total of 380 parcels, or 6.37% of the parcels in the city. All right, so with that, I think we will jump into the specific district standards. Let's see, go. All right, so starting with the bulk and dimensional standards table, I'll start with the lot area. So in the NR district, we're proposing that the lot area minimum be revised to reflect that of the lot area minimum for the CR district. So the NR district is currently 8,000 square feet for that lot area minimum, but we're proposing it be reduced down to the 6,000 square foot minimum that currently exists for that CR district. Next up, for the MR and UR district, we're proposing that the lot area minimum be per dwelling unit rather than for a development as a whole. So if you have a 2-unit development in the MR district, that would be a 12,000 square foot lot area minimum, and so forth. Next is the SC district, where we're proposing the lot area minimum be revised from 1 acre to reflect what is currently permitted as a conditional use, which is that 20,000 square feet. So next, going down to lot width, we are proposing that all of the lot widths be revised to the existing lot frontage requirements, since the definition, we're proposing the definition of lot width be revised to also include the minimum street frontage. So it would be the same measurement for both, and that would help to avoid flag or irregularly shaped lots. Are there any questions on lot area and lot width proposed changes?
I just have a general kind of understanding question. So like for a commercial area, I guess what's the public benefit to specifying a minimum lot size?
Having a minimum lot size in a commercial area helps to ensure that you have enough land area available to accommodate your parking and your landscape areas, as well as the building size itself.
Okay. And then I guess as a follow-up, there's some areas of the city, just because of natural features, that it's inevitable we'd end up with irregular lots. What would we do in those situations if we still wanted a slice of commercial development in one of those?
So the allowance for irregularly shaped lots would of course still exist within the subdivision ordinance, and then the measurement for lot width would be approved as a part of that subdivision And so it's not taking away that ability to develop in areas that have those natural features that might require that allowance.
Great, thanks.
All right, so moving down into the setbacks. So we are proposing that the side yard setback in the MR and the UR districts be revised to 5 feet from 10 feet and 15 feet respectively, as well as the rear yard setback would be revised to 20 feet in the MR district and 15 feet in the UR district, from 25 feet in both, to make sure that the buildable area in those lots is equal to that lot coverage maximum that we're proposing, so that all of the development that you're able to do on your lot is able to be done within your proposed yard setbacks if you have a regularly sized lot. And so next we're proposing in the CR district, or I'm sorry, in the CC district, maximum setbacks. So this would ensure that in that downtown setting, you're getting the development that is building that street wall and is creating a pedestrian friendly environment like is envisioned. Any questions on the setbacks? All right, going down to the building standards. We're not proposing any changes to the maximum height, but we are proposing that the lot coverage, the lot coverage would replace building coverage. So currently you have a building coverage maximum and a landscape surface ratio number. So we're proposing that the landscape surface ratio be eliminated and then lot coverage replace that building coverage. So lot coverage, unlike building coverage, would also include all impervious surface. So your driveways, your patios, your decks, all those different accessory structures that might be on the lot. So it would ensure that the stormwater management values of the city are being upheld. Any questions on the bulk and dimensional standards? All right. So these next few sections, 4-2, 4-3, and 4-4, are existing text that we are revising for clarity and to eliminate some redundancy. So there's not severe changes or really large proposed changes for these areas. So these would be the exceptions for yard setbacks, things that are allowed to intrude into required yards, and then the exceptions to maximum height. Are there any questions or anything we wanted to go over for these 3 kind of existing language sections? Nope. All right. So going down to the use matrix, this is probably the area where we see the most change proposed for this set of deliverables. So the existing permitted and conditional uses in the city utilize really broad use categories, and I think staff has communicated that that has gotten the city in trouble a little bit in the past, since the definition of those use categories aren't necessarily distinct and can provide a little too much flexibility in some instances. So we wanted to break down some of these broad use categories and then really modernize the uses as well. So for example, in the agricultural uses, staff communicated that you're not seeing a lot of traditional agriculture happening in Verona anymore. So we wanted to update these uses to be urban agriculture uses, or so we have the community garden, which would be one lot that is used for a garden either by a single person or by a group of people, solar energy collection farm, and then 3 different types of urban agriculture uses. So the urban agriculture indoor would be your hydroponics, aeroponics, aquaponics, that similar type of indoor farming. And then of course the traditional outdoor urban agriculture as well. Any questions on the agricultural uses? Nope. All right. So going down to the residential uses. So in this section, we are breaking down the conventional residential development, institutional residential development, and apartment and multiplex residential development broad use categories. So the multiplex and apartment residential development category was broken down into apartment and condominium above the ground floor as a part of mixed use, which would be permitted in your downtown areas. The apartment/condominium building, which would be a single building with multiple units, as opposed to apartment or condominium complex, which would be multiple buildings with multiple units, with each having multiple units. And then we have the duplex / townhome, less than or equal to 4 units, duplex and townhome, more than 4 units. And then 2 types of senior housing, one independent, one dependent. And then, of course, your traditional single-family detached. We also added the cluster mailbox use. Staff had communicated that this was something Wisconsin was moving towards, and we needed to accommodate. So we have some specific use standards to help the city accommodate those and accommodate residents whose lots might be made smaller due to that standalone lot for a cluster mailbox. Any questions on these residential uses?
Just to clarify, the cluster mailbox thing is coming from the post office, and so we have to do it. I don't necessarily think anyone, at least at the city potentially, or developers are entirely happy about it. It is the post office, and we are going to follow their rules.
Yeah. So it's best to accommodate it, as best as we can to make sure that no one's hurting because they needed to cede some of their lot for a cluster mailbox. All right.
If you want to go back, Jackie, real quick.
Sure.
Just one thing I'll point out as well is you look at the apartment uses. The apartment building there is a permitted use. I know that's one of the common things the Planning Commission kind of sees, but the thought process being of trying to get some of these uses that meet the intentions of what the district is, trying to have those as allowable permitted uses. So I wanted to point that one out specifically just because that's usually what draws a lot of people at public hearings right now. But with the current draft, the building would be a permitted use. We'd still have to go through the process, obviously, whatever the process would be, and the complex would be a conditional use.
Yeah, that's exactly right. We wanted to allow, as of right, those kind of lower impact or lower intensity multifamily or single family attached uses, and then have conditionally approved those more intense multifamily uses.
One question for you, Jackie.
Sure.
I realize I'm just staring at one portion of the document. So if we see a row, for instance, such as cluster mailbox or the first use as part of a mixed use, we don't need to designate that as either permitted or conditional, because these would never exist independently. They would be part of a larger development.
No, that's a good catch, and I apologize that this wasn't fixed before we presented, but I think we've been having syncing issues. So that should be, the cluster mailbox should be permitted in the NR and MR districts, and then the apartment condominium above ground floor would be permitted in the CC.
Okay, awesome, thank you.
All right, so going down to the institutional uses, these are really breaking down the indoor institutional and outdoor institutional broad use categories. So we have several uses for education purposes, so the college and university, elementary and middle school, high school, and then vocational and employment training, as well as indoor government uses and outdoor government uses, public recreation, active, public recreation, passive, place of worship, and then your public service utilities. Okay, so going down to the retail uses, we have adult uses as permitted in the UI district, and then we have our 3 general retail uses that would be replacing the indoor sales or service broad use category. So we're breaking them down into these 3 categories based on size. So the less than 10,000 square feet is meant to be those neighborhood serving retail uses that you might see in close proximity to residential uses. So they wouldn't have a very big impact on the character of a neighborhood, or it wouldn't generate so much traffic that it would kind of disrupt what you would prefer to have in a residential area. So next is your mid-size retail uses. And then your more than 50,000 square feet are those big box stores. So this is the type of use that Verona has expressed a desire to have a empty building agreement. to make sure that if there are, big box stores sitting empty, there's a strategy in place to address those. We also have outlot retail. So these are going to be those restaurants or stores that pop up in a parking lot of a big box type of store. So in an underutilized parking lot that might have excessive parking, this allows for that use to be shared in that lot. And then next we have two uses that we are calling out separately from that general retail category to make sure that we can regulate those a little bit more specifically. So that's pawn shops and thrift stores.
Hey, Jackie, if the Plan Commission or Council did not want to allow pawn shops or thrift stores, I'm just talking hypothetical, or any use in here, is it your advice that you list that as a use and just have the whole category as blank? Or how have you seen that done before?
So you can leave it in the table and just leave it as blank, and that would very clearly have it as prohibited. If you wanted to take it out of the list, then someone could then propose that to be added as a text amendment. But in the same way that they could add to the list, they could also request a text amendment that would make it a permitted or conditional use as well. So it's really up to what the city prefers in terms of really being clear about a use being prohibited.
Okay. Thanks.
One more question before we move on, Jackie.
Sure.
So obviously adult uses catches people's eye, and I'm not familiar, I haven't reviewed the 5-4A in detail, but the fact that it's a permitted use in one zoning district, urban industrial, leads me to believe that's not really a choice a community has. This has been litigated in some manner, and we're required to identify a zoning district where it's permitted by right.
Yeah, so it does need to be permitted somewhere in the city. And when we get down to the next article with the use-specific provisions, we can look over those in a little more detail in terms of the separation requirements that would be required for those uses. So in addition to only being permitted in one area of the city, there's additional requirements that would limit where they would be able to be located. But yes, the city does need to allow them somewhere in the city.
And specifically as a permitted use rather than a conditional use.
We did consult with Ansel Glink on that, and they said that the city does have the option to allow them as a conditional use or as a permitted use. I think with the reason I think the city was concerned about having it as a conditional use is the very, very detailed and specific review criteria that would need to be established as a part of it being a conditional use. So that can be kind of tricky ground. So it does protect the city from liability if it is a permitted use.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, so Pat, it's a First Amendment issue, and then we had a long debate kind of on the conditional use aspect, and it's just cleaner to have that as allowable by right. It just, if there ever was a challenge to the ordinance, I think there was some debate that we debated back and forth with Ansel Glink, and we looked at it. We just thought it was cleaner long term to call it out as allowable by right, so then we're not prohibiting or even any appearance of prohibiting the First Amendment right of people.
Yeah, it was. I assumed that there was not something that just snuck in without some serious consideration. But in the event someone would ask later, I just wanted to ask the questions.
Commissioner Tucker-Long?
Going along with that, is the same true of the general retail more than 50,000 square feet? Do we need to have a place where that's permitted by right? I just know that in the past there has been a lot of negative publicity about big box stores coming in here, and specifically Walmart or things like that. We've had some arguments in the past about them coming into town. Is that something that's also needs to be permitted by right?
It does not. So general retail categories you would not have to permit as of right. So that's not a First Amendment issue. That's not something that the city even needs to permit at all. But in the SC districts, that auto-oriented corridor commercial area, you see those 50,000 square foot or larger uses pretty regularly. 50,000 square feet for a big box store is still pretty small. But we broke it down in that way because that's the square footage that the city was comfortable in triggering that vacant building agreement. But yes, it would be up to the city whether they would want to permit, as of right, general retail more than 50,000 square feet or permit it at all.
Yeah, I guess I'd rather see that as conditional, just so we have a little bit more of a say in that versus permitted by right. But just in case.
Yeah, just to kind of piggyback on that, the state made some changes last year to some laws that make it more challenging now to deny a conditional use permit. So if we do build that in as a conditional use, we'll need to have specific standards and criteria established in that ordinance. And those are the standards and criteria that we have to base a decision on. So the state, what the state did was they based it in a nutshell. They came in and said, there are some situations occurring that communities are putting 30, 40, 50 sets of conditions on conditional use permits that could be argued are out of the bounds of what they should be doing. So the state basically came in and said, you can put conditions on, but they have to be tied directly back as a purpose. So we just have to be a little more. It's just legally it's more challenging now if we were ever to deny one just because of that law change. But I think as long as Household kind of gets those, or Jackie kind of gets those criteria established, we should be in good shape.
Right. So going down to the service uses. So this is breaking down the office, personal and professional office, indoor maintenance, and outdoor maintenance broad use categories. So we have a few different medical uses. So medical and dental office, acute care center, and hospital, as well as veterinary clinic / animal hospital. And then you have the commercial animal boarding as well. And then corporate campus, which would be similar to the multi-family complex. This would be multiple office buildings kind of built in a campus-like setting on one lot. And then your general service uses and with the less than 10,000 square feet and then more than 10,000 square feet, but still having that trigger that we'll discuss more when we get to 5-5 about the vacant building agreement as well. But the reason we didn't break this down into the 3 categories is that general service uses, you don't really take up big box stores like general retail uses might. So that's the reasoning behind the less than 10,000 and the more than 10,000 rather than the 3 different categories there. Any questions on the service uses?
I have one quick. Do we have to allow check cashing / payday loan stores at all?
No, so this was called out so that it did not fall under the general service category. So it was listed as a conditional use since it is often a use that isn't as desired by a community.
I mean, I guess just to add on to that, I would prefer it to not be allowed at all. Like I don't know how anyone else feels, but that's my opinion on it.
Yeah, I agree. If we can pull it out of the C and just leave it blank to kind of point out that it's been thought of but not approved, would be nice.
I agree.
I also agree.
Okay.
One other question, or I guess comment, in the other section you specified like 49,999. Like in this particular section, if they're just 10,000 square feet, do they have to add or subtract one to qualify for one of the 2, or do we just bump them up?
Yeah, so it should be less than or equal to 10,000 square feet and then more than. Good call.
Probably doesn't make a huge difference. But.
Gonna make a note.
Any other questions or comments?
One more, if you don't mind, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, of course.
So we're specifically identifying massage parlor as a less than desirable business. Do we have a clear definition of the difference between that and like someone that has a day spa that does pedicures and manicures and that kind of thing, as well as massage. What specifically triggers a massage parlor use? And I understand why it falls under the same category as check cashing and payday loan.
Yes, so the city had requested this be listed as a separate use based on, I think, the request of the police department. So we can work with them to really refine that definition to make sure it's addressing the concerns that they have.
While at the same time allowing, if someone wanted to open a day spa, to clearly designate that as a different type of use.
Yes, to make the distinction there, of course.
Great, thank you.
I thought I saw someone else. Questions or comments? Commissioner Tucker-Long?
Just a quick question of how flexible is this list of uses? Like, because we're calling out some very specific things here, but new things sort of pop up all the time. Like, you know, like 10 years ago, nobody knew what a CBD place was, and now they're popping up everywhere kind of thing. You know, so like, you know, who knows in 3 to 4 years what kind of thing might be the new big thing that we may want to have more of a say over. Like, how flexible is this list?
So the city is always able to make amendments, of course, to the zoning code. It'd have to go through that text amendment process. But the general service category or the general retail category is meant to capture those uses that we might not be able to define at the moment. So I don't know if you guys can see the definition here. It might be covered by that window pane. But it's any establishment whose primary activity is the provision of assistance as opposed to products to individuals, except for any uses that are otherwise listed. Does that answer your question? Okay. All right, so going down to eating and drinking uses. So all of the restaurant uses were previously under that indoor sales and service. So we're breaking those out so to better regulate those different restaurant uses. So we have a brewery, winery, and distillery, tasting room, a coffee and tea shop, microbrewery, and then 3 different restaurant categories. The reason we're breaking these up, it may seem, you know, if they're permitted similarly in each district, why break them out? And that's really to address, so we want to use the same list of uses in the use matrix as well as in the parking table. So these different uses would have different parking requirements. That's why I want to break those out here as well.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
I have a quick question. How do like drive-throughs get handled?
So we are including drive-throughs as an accessory use. So you could have a drive-through for a pharmacy, for a bank, for a restaurant. So that's included as an accessory use down below.
Gotcha. Commissioner Tucker-Long?
Oh, that was my question.
Perfect. All right, so next is the fitness facility and entertainment uses. So these are breaking down the indoor commercial entertainment and outdoor commercial entertainment broad use categories. So we have similarly broken down based on square footage, and then those outdoor facilities would be a separate type of use, as well as the archery and gun range indoor. Any questions on this one before I go on?
Would this include like event facilities or like auditoriums and things like that too, or is that a different entertainment use?
Yeah, so I think it would depend on the so it could fall under an institutional use if it was, you know, like an auditorium as a part of a school or a college would all be captured under the institutional use, as well as, you know, an auditorium or a large gathering space that is a place of assembly or a place of worship that would also fall under those institutional uses. But any commercial entertainment or commercial fitness facility would fall under this table H.
And would that also include like the trampoline park places and things like that? Do they fall under this as well?
Yes. That's why you see the more than 50,000 square feet as a conditional use in those industrial districts where you sometimes see a Topgolf or a trampoline gym. Right, so going down to lodging uses, so this is breaking out the commercial indoor lodging broad use category. So instead of having all of the different lodging uses that are currently permitted under that broad use category, we're only listing hotel. So that use category currently would allow extended stay hotels as well as motels. And staff expressed that there are really no motels in the city, so we could consolidate that into a hotel use.
One question here, Jackie, if you don't mind.
Sure.
So I forget how Verona is or isn't addressing Airbnb, short-term rentals. Those don't fall under the bed and breakfast use definition because that's not the primary use of the structure.
That's correct. So we have short-term rentals also listed under the accessory use table, since that would be an accessory use to a residential use.
Great, thank you.
I have a quick follow-up to that. So if someone was using it like it was a house in a residential neighborhood, but they were pretty much using it 80% of the time as an Airbnb or whatever, so would that fall under this lodging, or would that still be an accessory use?
So the way that Wisconsin has allowed municipalities to regulate short-term rentals, it also allows them to kind of dictate or control how long those properties are being able to be rented out as a short-term rental. So we can talk about that more as we get into the additional regulation in the use-specific provisions, but that does list a specified time period for every year that someone would be able to rent out that property. So that would really prevent people from only having their house as an Airbnb.
Gotcha. No, I think, yeah, that makes sense. I think we kind of want to avoid an issue. There was an issue in Fitchburg where basically a house on the end of a cul-de-sac got turned into like an Airbnb party house. And I don't think the neighbors liked it. And we'd want a way to potentially, restrict that if people thought they were living in a residential neighborhood and there was like a, party house or something like that.
Definitely. So there's some flexibility in terms of what the city can regulate and how they can control that. So that could be a more conversation as we get to that section in terms of the time period in which the city wants to allow that to occur.
We do, just so everybody knows, we do have a handful already in the city that are used as Airbnbs. We do have a couple that I know of at least that are actually full-time Airbnbs, houses that are exclusively rented out, by the week or by whatever. So that's something to consider as well as we talk through this of just how those would be grandfathered or dealt with.
All right, so going down to the vehicle-related uses, this breaks down the indoor sales and service broad use category just one more step. So you have the auto body repair, car wash, fuel sales, service station, and vehicle sales and rentals. This is meant to ensure that those higher intensity, like auto body repair uses, be a conditional use while allowing less intensive uses to be permitted as of right. Going down to the industrial uses, so we have we're recommending that artisan manufacturing be considered. So this would be a less intensive, more small scale industrial use. The city, I think, recently heard a request for a bat manufacturer or a smaller scale use that they wanted to permit but didn't know exactly how to define or how to allow. So this artisan manufacturing would accommodate those types of small scale industrial uses. And then we go down to brewery, winery, and distillery, communication tower, composting operation, distribution center, light industrial, and then storage or warehouse, wholesale. Any questions on the industrial uses? All right. And then for transportation uses, no real recommendations for changing anything here. So this would be airport and heliport, office parking lot. Off-site parking lot. All right, now going down to the accessory uses, So this list is probably, or is much longer than the accessory uses list that the city currently has. But we are consolidating a lot of those uses that were otherwise, with your residential uses or with your commercial uses into this category to really emphasize that they are accessory to a principal use. So first we have accessory building, and we are distinguishing this from an accessory structure. So an accessory building would be something with a permanent foundation like a garage or a larger detached garage or a shed, something that would require a building permit to construct, as opposed to an accessory structure, which is something that does not have a permanent foundation and would not require a building permit to construct or to assemble on your land. So in between that, we have the accessory dwelling unit. And so as we discussed, this is something we are proposing be permitted in the NR district and the RA district to promote affordability of housing. And in the additional regulations, we propose some sort of form-based regulations that would ensure that those units wouldn't kind of alter the character of the neighborhoods or cause issues with parking. So next we have the drive-through, as you all noted. So we have that as a conditional use in the SC district and in the SO district. Going down to outdoor activity and operation, so permanent. So this would be, those uses that either they are commercial uses or industrial uses that have activity happening outside. Then you have the outdoor dining without alcohol and outdoor dining with alcohol, and those are distinguished based on the liquor licenses that would be required. Outdoor display of merchandise, and then outdoor storage permanent. And then we have solar energy collection system, canopy. So that would similar to the, I think it was Echo, or a large user in town that has those solar energy panels on top of their parking garage. So that would accommodate that for other uses. And then ground mounted and roof mounted solar panels. And the next is the urban gardens. This would be a garden just as an accessory use as a part of a residential or commercial use. Any questions on the accessory uses? All right. Going down to the temporary uses, we are proposing a couple of extra temporary uses be included in the table. So the Christmas tree or pumpkin sales, so this would be those types of temporary uses that you see that aren't associated necessarily with the principal or primary use of the lot. So it might be in the parking lot of the grocery store. A local Rotary Club sells Christmas trees as a fundraiser, so it's not necessarily associated with the grocery store, but they're allowing the use of that space. So next is farmers markets, garage sale and estate sale, outdoor activity and operation temporary, outdoor assembly, and then outdoor display of merchandise temporary. So that would be distinguished from that Christmas tree and pumpkin sales, since it would be that principal uses temporary display of their merchandise outdoors. And then you have outdoor storage temporary, and then portable outdoor storage device, which would be those pods that you might see in a residential area for when people are moving, or if they would just want to store things off site. And then short-term rental, which would be your Airbnbs or VRBOs.
Hey, Jackie.
Yes.
Is this okay time for a question?
Yes, please.
So were we just trying to capture the spirit of what this Christmas tree pumpkin sales would be as a temporary use, or is there a reason why we wouldn't just say produce sales? So if someone's selling sweet corn rather than pumpkins, I mean, are we treating that differently for some reason? Or does that fall under a different category?
So the Christmas tree and pumpkin sales, that could be changed to seasonal sales if the city is more comfortable with sort of a non-specific or use category. But I think in terms of, if you're selling the sweet corn, that might fall under the farmer's market group. So that farmer's market, and the Christmas tree and pumpkin sales has a proposed limit on the number of days per year that would be permitted to happen on a lot. So I think it's a 30 or 40 day time period that would be allowed to accommodate those things you would see seasonally, like Christmas trees or pumpkins. Whereas, sweet corn or other types of produce that you would see all summer long would fall under that farmer's market type of use.
Okay. One quick follow-up. So the farmers market that currently takes place in one of our central parks, is there a reason why we wouldn't include that for public institutional? Is that what parks fall under? I forget.
I think that would definitely be appropriate in the PI district. So so farmers market as a permitted use in the PI.
I think that makes sense, but maybe Adam or Mr. Mayor, you guys have other thoughts about that, or anyone on the Plan Commission.
That makes sense for staff.
Yeah, I mean, I agree as well. I mean, because ultimately they'd have to go to the city if they're going to have it in a city parking lot or somewhere else. So it's not like someone could just rogue set up. So it seems like it would be fine.
All right, so are there any other questions on the use matrix in general, not necessarily just the temporary uses?
I have one quick one for the Christmas tree pumpkin sales. Yeah, I would prefer it to be more general, just so we don't get into a situation especially where it's like, well, if it's a Christmas tree, what if it's just a tree? And I wouldn't want to expose the city to liability or make people think we were treating people differently based on their religious beliefs. And I'm sure that wasn't the intention, but like just seeing it kind of spelled out. Commissioner Tucker-Long?
I was going to ask about fireworks sales, if that is then allowed under the Christmas tree and pumpkin sales thing as well, or because that's a temporary use as well and it's seasonal. So I'm just curious if that falls under that same thing, and if we want to call that out a little more separately.
So I think yes, it would. As the table is proposed currently, it would fall under that Christmas tree / pumpkin or seasonal sales, as we'll revise it to. If the city would desire to regulate that more strictly, that's definitely an option to call that out separately. But it would also, of course, have to follow all of those state statutes that would regulate fireworks sales as well. All right. So there's no more questions on the use matrix. I'll go move on to the specific use standards. So starting with our agricultural specific use standards, we have standards for our community gardens. So the first requirement would be that the name and contact information of the person or the organization who is the responsible party listed on the community garden permit has to be very clearly displayed. Next is some control on the accessory structure, so it would be limited to 10% of the lot or the parcel. And it have a maximum height of 12 feet. And then those accessory structure types would include storage sheds, hoop houses, and cold frames. And then next we are regulating composting of all of compost and organic matter on site to make sure that there's no impact in terms of rodents and pests and odors for adjacent properties. And then, of course, ensuring that activities that are on the site, including fertilizer or other types of, water, wouldn't be draining onto adjacent properties. And then as well, so have screening trash areas from public right-of-way. Any questions on our community garden regulations? All right. So next we're getting down to the solar energy collection farm. So first we're proposing there be a 4-acre minimum lot size. So this would be the minimum lot size necessary to accommodate a 1 megawatt farm. So that would include panels and other equipment. And then the rest of these regulations would just ensure that the collection farm is adequately buffered from the road, as well as set back to ensure that there aren't any safety concerns or safety issues associated. associated with that, including having the fully enclosed by a fence or a wall, and with keys available for emergency personnel, as well as appropriate warning signs. So next, in the urban agriculture outdoor, this is language that is currently utilized, I believe, for cultivation. So we adopted this language for urban agriculture outdoor, so allowing the raising and or use of animals at an intensity of 1 animal unit per acre. I know we had talked about maybe revising this to be more specific with staff in terms of what an animal unit is and how we are permitting those animals within an urban agriculture setting. Any questions about the urban agriculture outdoor? Nope. All right. So going down to our residential use standards. So first we have apartment / condominium building. So these are some more form-based standards to ensure that we have really nice quality apartment buildings that would really contribute to the character of the community. So first we have a requirement that the building entrance faces the primary street, so you don't have the entrance off of the parking lot, which would help to activate the sidewalk and make sure that there's a pedestrian-friendly environment there, which would be similar to a residential neighborhood with single-family homes where your front door faces the street. Next, we would require off-street parking to be located in the rear of the building, minimizing curb cuts and site vehicular access for safety reasons, making sure that service areas, so dumpsters and utilities, are screened and not visible from the public right-of-way, ensuring that there's pedestrian access from building entries and parking areas that connect to the sidewalk at the street frontage, as well as making sure that the building materials are traditional and time and weather tested, so we don't have those maybe newer materials that we don't know if they're going to last and really stand up to the test of time. So all of these requirements are trying to ensure that if you have a, maybe an 8-unit apartment building built near a single-family residential neighborhood, it's not a wholesale change in the development pattern that you would see there. So really helping to kind of blend these higher density residential uses in with those lower density uses. Any questions on that?
No.
Commissioner Hankard and then Commissioner Lytle.
Yeah, if I could. So I sense a little conflict there. We're asking them to put all the parking in the back, but then put the front entrance on the street, but no one's going to use it. So are we asking them to build something? I mean, how many of us use our front door? So I don't know what to do about that, but that just struck me as a conflict.
So I think the purpose of having the main entrance off of the sidewalk is, yes, although people in your neighborhood might never use their front door, they access it through their garage or through their back door, whatever it may be. Having that front door there creates a neighborly environment where you feel as though you can walk to your neighbor's house and knock on their front door instead of having only your entrances in the rear. So it creates more of a pedestrian-friendly environment, more of a neighborhood environment, as opposed to a commercial environment where you see the entrance off the parking lot.
Thank you.
Commissioner Lytle.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think my comment or question is similar to Mike's in that I like the idea of keeping off-street parking to the rear, but I'm imagining a situation where perhaps we had a visitor to the building who is in need of wheelchair access, or would there be a scenario in which we'd want to allow a spot or two for visitors, one being a handicap parking spot for visitors, to allow them easier access to the building. I know this is a relatively small building we'd be talking about. I like the idea of us having more specific standards for these rather than evaluating everything on a case by case. But that was just one scenario that came to mind.
Definitely. I would like to emphasize also that when requiring the main entrance to be off the primary road, it doesn't exclude someone from having a secondary entrance off of the parking lot. So it would, that would still accommodate that ADA accessibility that would be required. So the intention of having the primary entrance on the main road is to have the appearance of the primary entrance on the main road, just like you would in a single family residential area, whereas you would still be able to have access off of the parking lot or the rear of the building.
Commissioner Tucker Long and then Mr. Sayer.
I'm just kind of wondering too, because we've talked about some apartment buildings now where they have like the side of the building faces the main road, and it'd be really kind of weird to try to put a main entrance on the small side of a building that's facing the main road. I guess I like the concept of making it more of a neighborly feel where you can walk up to the front door, but it just seems like in practice, it's kind of a weird requirement that is going to require so many special cases for us to address.
Yeah, I guess my thought is maybe we take that shall and make a encourage instead, possibly. And I guess the project I'm thinking is actually right across the street here at City Hall, where you have the Lincoln Street apartments, where you have each one of those units that abuts Lincoln Street does have its own private entrance onto the sidewalk, but the main entrance is actually still from that parking lot behind the building, which is screened behind the building. I think that's something staff, and we can talk it through with Jackie. I think we all kind of get the intent of what we're trying to get here, but I think trying to have some of that flexibility, I think everyone's right that that's important. And I think as you look at even some projects in Madison that I'm thinking of as down by the Cole Center, some of those newer apartment buildings, as you'll walk on the bike path, that's just the bike path, but I mean, they've got, there's no doors heading out that way. So I think everybody here gets the, staff here gets the intent, and we'll take a look at that and tweak it, but that probably most likely that shall is going to come out for sure, and we'll swap that out.
Very good. So going down to the apartment/condominium complex, this would be more than one apartment building on a lot. So the first requirement would be the buildings would be arranged, and site circulation would be arranged in a way that would create a sense of public realm by framing and defining open spaces, street frontages, and amenities. So next, buildings and other site improvements would be clustered to maximize stormwater absorption. Building orientation should enforce site circulation patterns, open space patterns, and connections to other buildings on site. Parking being integrated into the overall site design to minimize its impact, reduce the loss of trees, and to be visually concealed from rights of way. So next is curb cuts and site vehicular access being minimized to increase safety. Screening of dumpsters and other service areas, providing pedestrian access from building entries and parking areas to the sidewalks and street frontage. Those requiring time weather tested exterior building materials, and then a minimum of 15% of the site as usable open space. Any questions on the complex? All right. We'll go down to cluster mailboxes. So these regulations are saying that the lot that's created for the purpose of accommodating cluster mailbox would not have to comply with the bulk and dimensional standards of the district in which it's located. And then also the zoning administrator would have the ability to give relief to any residential lots that would be impacted by the creation of that cluster mailbox lot. So next we have community living all capacities. So this is language that is currently existing, and then we are just revising for clarity in some sections. Going down to duplex/townhome. So these, the first one I think we will likely revise similar to the apartment building, so making that a should instead of shall. statement that's about the main entrance is facing the primary street. And so next, minimum of one of the parking spaces required for the use would be provided in an attached or detached garage. And then attached garages are encouraged to be located on side facades. And if attached garages are located on the primary facade, we have some aesthetic standards. So it can't exceed 45% of the facade's total width, has to be set back a minimum of 25 feet from the street right-of-way, and then also be recessed from the primary front facade, excluding porches, to ensure you don't get those kind of snout house style homes. Any questions on the duplex and townhome? All right, so going down to the senior housing, both dependent and independent options. So this language is currently for your institutional residential uses. So it's proposed to be revised first to make it also applicable to areas outside of your office districts and office, so your suburban office district or your neighborhood office district, as well as shall be located with primary vehicular access on a collector arterial road that limits where these types of uses could be located. And then we're eliminating this conditional use reference for redundancy. Any questions on this section? All right. Going down to single family detached. So these are the same requirements that we are proposing for the townhome or duplex. So those attached garage kind of standards to make sure that you see a house and not a garage from the road.
And just to kind of emphasize that, that's a new requirement that we put in here. That's kind of, if you've heard the term snout garages or homes, where all you have is the garage in the front and you have a very small portion of the actual front facade visible. It cuts down on just that. All you see is the garage. So that's a new thing that we've introduced here as part of this rewrite. So just wanted to point that out, as that's a new concept for the city, but it's common elsewhere.
Commissioner Takalala?
I'm just curious with the requirements about, no more than 45% of the facade's total width and things like that. Is that going to be encouraging like more single car garages? I mean, is that really going to be wide enough? I'm just thinking about my house, and I think that, the width of our garage is slightly more than half of the front of our house width-wise. Just because of the way our lot is cut and things like that, our house goes more back than wide. And, a single car garage nowadays is not really beneficial, or I guess it's better than nothing, but it's, not the ideal as far as, what you want on your house. So I just want to make sure we're not restricting 2-car garages.
No, so this would not restrict 2-car garages. It's encouraging that the attached garages be located on the side facade. So it would be accessed from the side of the building rather than the front of the building. So you would still have the ability to, have the 2 or 3-car garage, but just access from the side, so that's not all you see from the front of the house.
Sure, I understand that, but I'm just thinking about all the lots in our neighborhood, and none of them have garages that you access from the side because the lots aren't wide enough. All the lots are deeper instead of wider. And I'm just, like I said, just thinking through my entire neighborhood, I can think of maybe one house that the garage is accessed from the side as opposed to the front of the house. And
Yeah, I think from a staff standpoint, we kind of wanted to raise this to the conversation with the Plan Commission, because if you look at some of the newer subdivisions we've approved, all you see are the garage. So if you go to Hometown Groves, you get in these smaller type lot subdivisions, that's all you see. And does it, if it's not a concern for the Plan Commission, that's something we don't have to regulate. But the thought process being it would cut down on just, when you pull in, just looking at that garage, you see that, like I said, you see that at Hometown Grove, and then you also see that just west of Enterprise. and north of Lano Street, there's a subdivision in there, and just south across country where you pull in and all you have is the garage, and you have maybe 10, 15 feet, and then you have the house. So we kind of wanted to raise that. There's other ways that we could look at this as well, of just changing percentages and whatnots, but wanted to kind of start the conversation at least to see where the temperature was on this item.
Commissioner Lytle, I think you had your hand up.
Thank you. Yeah, I definitely see where Commissioner Tucker Long is coming from. At the same time, I see that this is something we're encouraging. I don't really know what weight documenting this as something the city encourages, but a house with less garage facing the street is definitely more aesthetically pleasing, so I see why we would encourage it. I definitely don't think it should be a requirement because many lots just simply don't accommodate that. But I was curious, as a question maybe to Jackie or to staff, what's the point of listing something the city encourages in a situation like this, and how that would actually work in practice?
So language that encourages, as if here the attached garages should be located on the side of the facade or side facade. If it's a conditional use, and that is an encouragement, would be something that the you all or the city council would be able to hold those uses to approve that conditional use. So here we have encouraging attached garages being located on side facades, and then requirements if those garages are located on the primary facade.
Commissioner Tucker Long.
I guess, yeah, I guess I'm really concerned that, we keep talking about we want more affordable housing and we want, more starter homes that people can get into. And if we're requiring that the garage, can't be more than 45% of the front, because the way I'm reading this, and let me know if I'm reading this wrong, but we're encouraging it to be on the side, but we're requiring that it can't exceed 45% of the front. And I'm just concerned that, a house that's small enough to be an affordable starter home is maybe not going to be wide enough to accommodate a 2-car garage.
So I definitely think since these are aesthetic requirements, it's not about, safety or welfare or anything. It's probably up to the city in terms of whether you all want to regulate this type of form for your single family detached neighborhood. So maybe that's something you all think about and get back to Adam and Catherine on. So maybe that's tweaking the numbers that are proposed here. Maybe it's 55% or 60% or some other percentage, tweaking some of those other requirements as well, or eliminating any sort of regulation for garages in single family detached neighborhoods. That's totally up to you all in terms of how you want to address that.
Commissioner Tucker Long and then Commissioner Lytle.
Sorry, one more thing, and then I'll be quiet. Is this something that we could restrict based on the cost of the house? So if it's more than $200,000, then we require that the garage can't exceed 45%. But if it's less, then we give them more wiggle room with still allowing a 2-car garage on a smaller house. Is that something that we could do, or would that get us into trouble?
Mr. Sayer.
No, I wouldn't. You don't want to tie it back to cost, just because cost is going to be a variable over time as well. Typically home values go up, but I would just say no. That opens up other arguments and whatnot. And we can show you some examples if you guys want to see them of other communities, what they've done as well. I mean, that's an option too. Of Catherine's texting me about some pictures I know she pulled up that I can't find right now. They're on the network, but I know she did some research on this too to have some pictures for it. So we can always circle back to this conversation as well. I guess I think the most important thing from a staff side of this was, is it an important item or not? And we didn't want to skip over this too. And we want to at least raise that as an issue because we've had some recent developments that, you have a lot of garage there. If that's what if the city's fine with that, and that's fine. But we just want to make sure we're raising those issues.
Commissioner Lytle?
Yeah, I know we've kind of beaten up on this particular section. Sort of the intent of this that I do like is I've seen some houses on relatively small lots that have really squeezed things to add a third stall. And so in those cases, you do have a ton of garage and not a lot of house facing the street. And so if this is a way to not discourage 3-stall garages, because I know lots of people have reasons for that, but to promote a little more balance, then I think this is worth looking into a little more. But I think Commissioner Tucker Long has some really good points about how do we do it in a smart way that doesn't impact affordability.
Other questions or comments?
Luke, I found a picture if you want me to show kind of what the intent was.
Yeah, you can do a quick screen share.
I hope I can. Okay, Jack, I'm going to take the screen for you for a second.
Sure thing. Do I need to stop sharing?
Nope. I'll just grab it, and then when you're ready, when we go back, you'll have just take it from me. So I think you can see that, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so that is from Pine Hill Drive. I think, is that in Middleton, Catherine, or is that in kind of the west side of Madison?
Middleton.
Middleton. Okay, so that's kind of the intent of the side loading garage, where you'd side load it. You typically have a window or some type of decorative feature, and it once again you have this. You have the garage door isn't the focal point. The actual structure itself is more the focal point. So that's the intent here. And Jackie, you can take the screen back because I'm done. I think Catherine has something to add.
The other thing I would say too is when there's a different way to work around the ordinance when you want to encourage something, you can also put it in the comprehensive plan or the neighborhood plan for some of the language there too. So when we review developments, you can refer to that. And then it gives you the language of we need to consider that, and we have document that supports that idea without having to confine your hands to it always has to be done that way, but gives you more flexibility.
That's a very good point, Catherine, and controlling it in more of a planning and policy document rather than in a regulatory framework is definitely an option. Okay. Are y'all able to see my screen again?
No.
No.
Oh, not yet.
Can you now?
Yes.
All right. So going down to institutional use standards. So these are really the existing language being revised. One, to get some definitions out of this section to move them into the definition section, as well as any buffer yard or screening requirements or landscape requirements. Those would all be addressed in Article 6, the development standards. So any questions on the public recreation active or public services and utilities existing language that's been cleaned up? All right, so getting down to the adult uses, this language has all been updated and revised by our teammates at Ansel Glink. So this is all attorney approved language. It seems like a lot, but it is what is required to be had or to be included in the regulation to ensure that the city has the kind of the teeth that it needs to enforce these regulations. Any questions on the adult uses? All right, so getting down to general retail less than 10,000 square feet. So these are regulations that are encouraging or that would be requiring form-based standards that would have development be more pedestrian oriented or similar in a development pattern to a residential character. So I think similar to how we've discussed that main entrance oriented towards the primary street, making that a should instead of a shall. And then we have the requirement for off-street parking and loading in the rear of the property, minimizing curb cuts and site vehicular access, screening service areas, dumpsters, and utilities, requiring that pedestrian access from building entries, parking areas, and the sidewalk, and then having those time and weather tested exterior building materials. Any questions on the general retail less than 10,000? All right. So going down to general retail, 10,000 to 49,999 square feet. So these are all the same requirements for general retail more than 50,000, except for one thing. So I wanted to review those sort of in tandem with one another. So a requirement for facade articulation for facades that are greater than 100 feet in length, measured horizontally, to ensure you have some visual interest within that development. Next, the ground floor facades that face public streets requiring to have an arcade, a clear glass display window, entry areas, awnings, or other sorts of features that really activate that realm for pedestrians for at least 60% of the horizontal length. Again, minimizing curb cuts and site vehicular access, screening service areas, dumpsters, and utilities, building in that pedestrian access and those time and weather tested exterior building materials. Now the difference for the general retail more than 50,000 square feet than the one that's less than would be the requirement that the property owner enter into a vacant building agreement with the city. Any questions on these larger two general retail categories? All right, so moving down to outlot retail. So again, these would be, if you imagine a large grocery store, in their parking lot they might have a restaurant or another smaller retail establishment. This would be accommodating those types of uses. So it's establishing a separate setback requirement, so they can be as close to 15 feet from a public right-of-way. All of the off-street parking and loading being located in the rear of that building. Requiring that curb cuts and site vehicular access be shared with the primary structure so they don't have their own access off of the street. Screening of any service areas or dumpsters, and then providing that pedestrian access. Do we have any questions on outlot retail? Nope. All right. So going down to pawn shops. So this would limit where pawn shops are able to be located. So it would be a minimum distance of 3,000 feet from any other existing pawn shop. The window and door area of an existing first floor facade along a public street can't be reduced, or any changes being made to block out those entrances from the building at eye level, so you have a clear view into the building. And then requiring for new construction a minimum of 30% of the facade to allow for those clear views into the building. So through windows or doors with clear or lightly tinted glass. Prohibiting the use of bars, chains, or other sorts of similar security devices. And then requiring that the receipt, sorting, and processing of any goods occur completely within an enclosed building. Now these standards are substantially similar to the thrift store standards as well. So any questions for thrift store or pawn shop? All right.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see. Commissioner Lytle.
Thank you. I'm curious how we arrived at 3,000 feet. Is there state requirements, or is there some standard practice where 3,000 feet is like the maximum we could set that at, or just what the basis for that was?
So it was not a state requirement. It is sort of the best practice. So it's a distance that would still allow those uses to exist within the city, but not be co-located in a way that would be a detriment to that area.
Thank you.
All right, so moving down to corporate campus. And so these standards are very similar to those for the the multifamily. So it'd be the apartment or condominium complex. So it's those multiple buildings on a single lot. So these standards would help to create that sense of public realm, help to maximize stormwater absorption through how buildings are sited, ensuring that building orientation reinforces site circulation patterns, open space patterns, and connections to other buildings, integrating parking into the overall site design, minimizing curb cuts and site vehicular access, screening service areas and dumpsters, providing that pedestrian access, having time and weather tested exterior building materials. And then instead of requiring a certain amount or a certain percentage of the development area be preserved as open space, we have buildings, parking lots, drive aisles, and other site improvements shall be sited to preserve natural site features and integrated outdoor amenities and gathering places. So it's not a certain percentage requirement, since an office use doesn't necessarily have the same demands for outdoor recreation as a residential use would. Any questions for the corporate campus?
I guess I have a quick question about what kind of building material would be considered traditional? Because like I look at Epic's campus and like a lot of the material is high quality, it's very nice, but I'm not sure I would call all of it traditional.
So I think we have different types of building materials here that wouldn't necessarily be considered, masonry or that type of traditional. And those precast panels with that inlaid or stamped brick texture, but it's meant to capture. We have lots of evidence that, masonry is a great building material, that ephes maybe isn't the best building material. So trying to control that for quality. So maybe traditional isn't the best term. That could definitely be tweaked or revised. But I think time and weather tested so that the city knows that it's a quality building material that isn't going to, in the next 10 years really lose, its appearance, the quality of its appearance, and really degrade over time.
It makes sense to me. Commissioner Tucker-Long, and then Mr. Sayer.
Going along with this, I've noticed that in some of the places you say time and weather tested materials and techniques such as but not limited to, and other places you just say such as. And I'm just wondering if we should make that more consistent.
Yes, it should be such as but not limited to in all instances. That's a good catch. Thank you.
Mr. Sayer.
I guess my only comment on that's talking about building materials, not design. So Epic does use high quality materials. Their design is not traditional, but the materials, if you look at them on just a brick by brick basis, are for the most part, except for some metal, is pretty traditional. They use a lot of brick. They have a slate roof, I think, on one of the buildings. So I mean, definitely the design is not, but the exterior probably would meet that requirement from a material standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's partially though what I'm getting at too is that like time and weather tested sound great. Traditional I feel like is kind of an ambiguous term because I wouldn't want to argue is metal traditional, is that kind of brick traditional. I'd rather just say it's going to last for a long time. It looks good. We're fine. Other questions or comments? Commissioner Tucker-Long.
Would this be an area where we could maybe encourage underground parking to help keep more permeable ground and things like that?
I think if the city is interested in requiring underground parking, this would be an area to do that. I think Catherine's idea of having that included as a part of a planning or policy document where it's encouraged rather than required, that could also be one approach as well. So that's totally up to you all, to the city, in terms of what your appetite is for requiring that underground parking.
Any thoughts on encouraging or requiring underground parking, as long as we're on the subject? Commissioner Powers, then Commissioner Tucker-Long.
I agree with the encouraging, but I wouldn't want to require it and kind of diminish the chances of someone wanting to move in because of the cost of the underground parking.
Commissioner Tucker-Long.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. I'd like to strongly encourage it, but I worry about requiring it because we do have some areas where underground parking is just not really feasible because of the type of land that's there, the rock that's there, and other things. It's just, you know, it's easier in some places and not so much in other places. So I'd hate to make it a requirement, but I definitely think it's something we should strongly encourage because that just gives us a lot more space in town to manage versus.
Parking garages, which are very nice, but they're very, very expensive, and they were built with TIF, and I wouldn't want, you know, the city wanted to commit to necessarily having to do TIF for everything, and to, as was stated previously, I wouldn't want to scare people off either. Any other thoughts on this one from the Planning Commission? All right, let's proceed.
So next we have commercial animal boarding. So these are the existing requirements with some additional ones added in. The second one here is requiring fully enclosed outdoor exercise areas with either a fence or a wall with a minimum height of 6 feet. And then having requirements to abate noise that would be associated with, you know, kennel units or boarding of animals, containing and controlling all waste on site with, you know, proper drainage and other physical elements. And then requiring that boarding areas be air conditioned and heated so that you don't have to have windows and doors and other openings open, so they can be closed at all times with the exception of ingress and egress. Any questions for the commercial animal boarding? All right, so we will go on to general service. So similar to the other areas where we're encouraging but not requiring main entrances to be located on the primary street, we'll revise that here as well. So next is the parking located in the rear, minimizing curb cuts and vehicular access, requiring the screening, the pedestrian access, and the time and weather tested but not necessarily traditional building materials. And so next, the more than 10,000 square feet, these are going to be the same requirements we had for general retail. So the facade articulation requirements, having the 60% of the ground floor facade with the clear glass display windows or entry areas, having minimizing curb cuts and site vehicular access, screening service areas and dumpsters, providing that pedestrian access, and the time and weather tested exterior building materials. And then if the general service use exceeds 50,000 square feet, then the property owner would be required to enter into the vacant building agreement with the city. So next we have personal storage facility. So this would be like a, you know, just a storage facility with all of those. First would be the requirement would be in a single building. So you wouldn't have, you know, rows of what would look like garages on a lot. Prohibition of outdoor storage, prohibition of the storage of hazardous or toxic materials. Of course, no storage spaces being used for residential occupancy or for office space, and then the same requirements for those time and weather tested materials. This is really trying to encourage an improvement in the appearance of these kind of personal storage facilities. Any questions here? All right, so going down to coffee and tea shop, these regulations would only be applicable in the NO district, so that neighborhood office district. So that since that district is meant to really be the transition area between residential areas and commercial areas, or be more integrated into residential neighborhoods, these requirements would make the a coffee or a tea shop be more similar in character to a residential use. So again, revising A to be an encouragement rather than a requirement, and having off-street parking in the rear, minimizing curb cuts, screening service areas, providing that pedestrian access, and requiring those time and weather tested building materials. Any questions for the coffee and tea shop?
Commissioner Lytle?
Thank you. I know this isn't where we're defining what a coffee tea shop is, but can you clarify when something crosses over from being a coffee tea shop to being fast casual, in terms of the ratio of coffee tea to sandwiches and scones and that kind of thing?
Yeah, so it would be so totally based on the definition, of course, and that would be based on the amount of food that would be prepared on site. So like in a Starbucks or other sorts of coffee or tea shops, those are often goods that are brought in from outside and then sold on site rather than prepared on site. So that's one way of differentiating that from other more, a fast casual Panera or another restaurant that would be making those more primarily food rather than drink options.
So you haven't had experience someone trying to cast their bagel sandwich shop as actually being a coffee tea shop to be able to get into a space that wouldn't typically allow fast casual?
So I think whenever a developer sees an opportunity to move into an area that they want to be in, they're going to take it, and that's why having really strong definitions is very important in the zoning. So really defining what that means, and it's definitely dependent on what the city sees as appropriate in those residential areas. So if a coffee shop is seen as appropriate but a bagel shop isn't, then we can define it as such.
Great. I was probably going into more hypotheticals than we needed to. I was just curious. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. All right, so getting down to the fitness facility less than 10,000 square feet. So these are going to be those same requirements that we saw for the other less than 10,000 square feet uses. So that general retail, general service. So of course we'll revise this. So it's encouraging the primary entrance on the primary street, and then the time and weather tested, but not necessarily traditional building materials. And the same for the 10,000 to 49,999 square feet. So those would be those same requirements as we've already discussed, as well as the more than 50,000 square feet. Are there any questions on the fitness facility or entertainment facility? All right. You can hear that buzzing. It's an emergency alert about the trains no longer running in Chicago. All right, so now we have, these are existing requirements for physical health and entertainment facilities outdoor. So we're revising these. So we have the buffer yard requirements here. We'll be moving those into Article 6 with our development standards, and the rest of those landscape requirements, as well as the language down here at the bottom that reinforces that it's a conditional use. Since we list that in the use matrix, we want to eliminate that redundancy here. Any questions on the physical health and entertainment outdoor? All right, so we'll move on to bed and breakfast. So these have been revised to, one, move this sign area text and the buffer yard requirements into their more appropriate sections. So Article 7 for signs and Article 6 for buffer yards. And then these three requirements here are all covered under the building code. So we wanted to eliminate them here to eliminate any redundancy. And then this is just cleaning up the language, making it more reader friendly. Any questions on the bed and breakfast? All right. So now we are getting down to our vehicle related uses. So first is fuel sales. So this would be a gas station. So these are fully new requirements for the city that I know staff wanted you all to consider and really have a discussion about. So first would be a setback of a minimum setback requirement for fuel pumps of 25 feet and 20 feet for fuel pump canopies. Next, if it's located within 50 or next to a residential district boundary line, that setback would be increased to 50 feet. And then next, the fuel pump canopies having that requirement for the columns to be placed in a manner that's similar to the relation to the roof as to the exterior walls of the building. So you don't have what might look like a lollipop. It really looks like it's supporting the structure. And then the materials being consistent with that of the primary building facade. Any questions for fuel sales or anything you'd like to discuss in terms of the setbacks or the requirements for the canopies?
Commissioner Tucker-Long?
Would we want to have something like I forget what exactly it was called, but like vacated building agreement or something with this? I'm just thinking of, like when gas stations shut down and then we're trying to get rid of the lot, but there's a whole lot of junk underground that needs to be cleaned up before anybody else could use it. Could we put some sort of agreement in place that if they vacate the property, they have to clean it up so it could be used for other purposes before they leave?
I can probably take that one. I mean, the newer stations don't have that problem. The challenge we have with these old stations is they were built in older standards were in place. So, typically the new stations, and Quick Trip is a good example up by the new high school. I think that one has a double wall in it and also alarms on it as well too. So there's some pretty significant DNR standards on these stations now compared to before. I think you could. I just don't know if it's going to be a problem. I mean, I think the bigger problem are the old ones, and that's why they sit, because there's the risk of contamination in the ground, but the risk that you have on these newer ones is a lot lower. I'm not saying it's not there; it's just a lot lower. But the contamination is why a lot of those places don't get sold and redeveloped. If you go out, and I'll just give an example. If you go head west, like I've spent a lot of time in Portland out that way. A lot of the old gas stations there with the canopy still there have been converted into retail establishments or bars or restaurants as well. So there are ways you can do that. I mean, if you're looking at the one that we have, the old Treads, obviously that happened as well too, because that's an old gas station. So I'm kind of rambling, but I think we're covered mostly from a contamination standpoint, especially by these newer ones. That'd be my recommendation, at least. I mean, I think you could potentially put something into it, but I haven't seen it before. I'm not sure if Jackie has.
Jackie, have you seen anything?
No, I have not. And I would reiterate what Adam was saying. The regulations currently from the state would ensure that the contamination that you see from older gas stations is much more minimized and much more unlikely to occur. So requiring that to enter into a vacant building agreement wouldn't really capture those sites that we really would be concerned about having the contamination.
I guess to follow up, is there a way, I mean, Mike, I guess some of this is just purely historical, being worried about it, but like there's two lots that are in my opinion, very critical locations in the city that haven't been developed on because they're contaminated. And I'd worry about a situation more like if a gas station company declares bankruptcy, the franchisee owner skips town because sometimes people are unethical. Like what kind of legal options would the city have to be like, you can't abandon this, you have to make sure it's clean?
Well, we'd have the abatement process. So if someone does contaminate a site and it's causing a public nuisance or causing a public health issue, we could pursue the abatement option. I mean, the big challenge with that vacant store agreement, which I know we have it, we've used it for festival, we'll use it again in the future. I'll be honest with you, most developers don't like those. Even with festival, I mean, that was a long negotiation with them to get that into place. That was not a simple, here, you do this situation. That took many back and forths and trying to get that done, and they still weren't crazy about it. So, I mean, I think if you start putting that on potentially a gas station, I mean, this is my opinion. If you don't want gas stations, you're better off just regulating them out at that point, because I think a lot of people are going to balk at it, because even the one we have with Festival right now, I mean, I know it's going to be tough to kind of keep that going forward, because some people are going to balk at it and just walk away and not want to do it. So, I mean, but to put that at a gas station, I mean, the issue isn't so much the building, the issue is the potential contamination. And the question then comes back to, if the issue is contamination there, what if you had a biotech user? Would you put the same thing on them as well? Because sometimes biotech users or some of those tech users, they have substances in those buildings that can be just as bad as oil and grease and gas. So I think the point is taken. I guess my feeling is if there's a concern with gas stations, maybe you look more towards tighter restrictions on where they go, or do you want them to go is the question too. But there's no good answer because, I mean, it's just, there's no good answer for it because the old ones are creating the problem.
Commissioner Tucker-Long?
And just to clarify, I wasn't meaning specifically like a vacant building requirement with them, but some agreement like that, just to make sure the site is clean when they leave. Not that they'd have to do something with their building, but, you know, and I guess I'm concerned too much relying on like, well, right now we're fine because the government regulations will keep things clean for us, but I mean, those could change at any time too. And, you know, I just want to make sure we don't end up with a lot of contaminated sites that we can't do anything with because we have so much limited space. You know, I mean, we only have so much space in town. So.
Yeah, what we could look at is that we have a wellhead protection ordinance that obviously applies to areas that have municipal wells nearby, but we could look at some of that language as well. And I'd probably, that we could talk to Ms. Fisher as well too, just because her team's familiar with that. But just looking at maybe some of those requirements from the wellhead protection ordinance, which that goes back to requiring tanks to be double walled, potentially putting an alarm on them. So just putting those safeguards in place that, you know, God forbid, if something did happen, at least they've built it the correct way that if a tank burst or was leaking, it wouldn't contaminate the whole site. So there's ways that we could possibly look at a few of those kind of additional requirements, no different than how we do in our wellhead protection areas. So that's an option.
Were there any other questions or comments about fuel sales, or should we move on to artisan manufacturing? All right. So the artisan manufacturing, again, is meant to accommodate those really small scale manufacturing uses and very low impact manufacturing uses. So we have a gross floor area maximum of 10,000 square feet. Limiting or prohibiting, outdoor storage or outdoor operations and activities, allowing a maximum of 25% of the total area of the building to be used towards retail sales of goods manufactured on site only, as well as a maximum of 2 residential units to be used for 25% of the total area of the building. So that's allowing for that live workspace. Any questions for artisan manufacturing? No. All right. So next we have communication tower or telecommunications tower text. So there was some language drafted by the city back in 2018 that is currently being reviewed by the attorney. So we'll drop that back in here once that's complete. Next, composting operations. So this is existing language that has been updated. So again, moving that buffer yard requirement to the development standards section. Revising 3 so that food scraps, so food would be able to be composted in addition to those other sorts of yard scraps or whatever it is that's currently being composted, but ensuring that it's done completely within an enclosed building with all of the doors, windows, and any other structure openings completely closed, that you don't have the associated smells that often come along with compost operations. So any questions on composting? All right. Going down to distribution center, again, this is some revised language. The only thing we added here was a reference to anti-idling prohibition that is found in the city code. So that reference will be updated to ensure that people are aware of that within the distribution center regulations. So next, light industrial activities requiring that be conducted entirely within a completely enclosed structure. And then, of course, if they have the outdoor operations or outdoor activities, that would be approved as that accessory use, as we discussed previously. So moving on to our transportation use standards. These are your existing standards for airport and heliport. Again, moving our buffer yard requirements to development standards and eliminating redundancy and referencing the conditional use requirements. Okay. So moving down to accessory use standards, the first one here is for accessory buildings. The first requirement is only one accessory building located per lot, and then with a maximum size of 900 square feet, except as a conditional use in the RA districts that would accommodate barns or other accessory uses that are typical for rural agricultural users. Next, establishing a maximum height of 15 feet, as well as a separation requirement from the primary building for fire issues. So it's 10 feet unless it's constructed with a 1 hour fire rating, in which case it can be 5 feet from the primary building. And then finally, for our location requirements for accessory buildings, that building could be located entirely in the required rear yard and then be set back a minimum of 5 feet from side and rear property lines, or completely within the buildable area of the lot and to the side or rear of the primary building, or as is permitted as an intrusion into those required yards. Any questions on the accessory building? All right, so moving on to our accessory dwelling units. So same as the accessory buildings, only one would be permitted per lot, and they would have to follow all of the requirements of the accessory buildings except for the height, since you would be required to have a taller height if, for instance, you have a accessory dwelling unit above a garage. So you have a maximum square footage of 900 square feet or 50% of the size of the principal structure, whichever is less. And then, of course, the internal accessory dwelling units located in a basement shall be permitted to occupy the entire area of the basement, so you don't have to cut up that basement space. Next, the detached and attached accessory dwelling units would be required to be located to the rear of the primary structure, so it's not what you see from the street. Only allowing one entrance from the street, so again, it's not disrupting the character of the community as it is currently, so that you have entrances to those accessory units either from the side or the rear of the facade. Requiring that the primary structure and the accessory dwelling unit be served by a common driveway that connects the accessory dwelling unit to a public or private road. Next is the requirement for parking. So that parking requirement will be established in the development standards section, but here we're requiring that that space not be located in any part of the required front yard setback, and we are prohibiting the use of tandem parking spaces. And then last but not least, a requirement that the accessory dwelling unit be similar in character to the primary structure and to abutting properties, including roof, pitch, eaves, building materials, window trim, color, and landscaping. So all of these requirements are encouraging or would be requiring accessory dwelling units be developed in a way that really integrates them into the neighborhoods that they're located in, so that they are more seamless and don't alter the character of those communities. Any questions on accessory dwelling units? No? All right. So going down to accessory structures. So these would be those accessory structures that would not require a building permit. So they would not have a permanent foundation. So again, only one permitted per lot, having a shall not exceed 100 square feet, shall not have a permanent foundation, and shall have a maximum height of 8 feet. So these should reflect those triggers for the building permit. Of course, located a minimum of 10 feet from the primary building for those fire safety concerns, and then the same location requirements as the accessory buildings. So either entirely within the required rear yard and a minimum of 5 feet from their side or rear property lines, or entirely within that buildable area. Next, we have the company provided on-site recreation. This is existing language. that has been cleaned up to better locate those buffer yard requirements and to eliminate the redundancy in the conditional use requirements. Next, we have drive-through. So this black text is all of your existing language, and we've added requirements for overhead canopies or similar structures going over those, if they are to exist, going over the drive-through area. So this is more for banks or pharmacies that have drive-throughs rather than restaurant uses that have drive-throughs often have sort of a canopy or an attachment from the primary building. So this would be ensuring that that overhead canopy or similar structure be of a consistent roof line with the building, and then have any columns in similar locations that you would a wall. And then having those canopies be finished with materials consistent with the primary building. So here at 10, we have our menu board allowance. So this would be a maximum of 2 menu boards combined with a maximum area of 80 square feet, not exceeding, and each menu board shall not exceed 60 feet in area or 10 feet in height. And then allowing those menu boards to utilize electronic message boards for 100% of that menu board area. So next, for stacking lanes, we have our dimensional requirements here. So a minimum depth of 20 feet per stacking space. And then if it's a 1-lane drive-through, a minimum width of 12 feet. And if it's a 2-lane drive-through, a minimum width of 10 feet.
Jackie?
And now,
Oh, sorry.
no,
Commissioner.
go ahead.
Just confirming with staff that some of the issues we've run into over the last 10 or so years with our one-size-fits-all drive-through requirements, we feel like this is gives us the flexibility we were looking for and makes things more appropriate to the type of drive-through use. That was my question.
Yes, in section 12, yes, that will solve most, if not all, of our issues.
Thank you.
Yeah, so 12 here establishes the different minimum stacking requirements for different types of drive-throughs. So, for example, the bank teller would have 2 per lane, so you would have to have 2 stacking spaces for that use, whereas a restaurant would have 6 per order box, so that you don't have cars lining up in the street or in drive aisles. So it's really based on demand for those types of drive-throughs based on transportation engineer standards.
And then just to follow up, this is, like you said, transportation engineer, this has been kind of like, I guess, battle tested. Other communities have tried stuff like this and it's, haven't seen any big issues.
Yes. So of course, a developer could install more stacking spaces, but this is just a minimum setup so that you ensure that you have the minimum amount of space necessary to accommodate those likely users.
Great.
All right, so next we have our home occupation standards. These are substantially similar to what you have existing. So ensuring that those home occupations are subordinate to the use of the dwelling for residential purposes, not generating any additional traffic or excess traffic than what's typical, prohibiting any outdoor storage, and then shall not involve the use of commercial vehicles in excess of what is normal for the district. And then we have, this was revised to allow for a sale of items online, but not sale of items in the residence itself. Any questions on home occupations? All right. Moving on to
Commissioner Tucker-Lawn.
Sorry, I thought of one. What about places that do like local delivery? Would that be allowed? I mean, if they're selling things, but they do local delivery, but they don't necessarily sell them online?
When I was discussing with staff about revising this section here to allow for online sales, it was based on, I believe, some instances where those online sales were happening as a part of a home occupation. I think limiting it to online sales would help to limit the amount of excess traffic that's generated by having a home occupation out of residence. So these regulations are really meant to ensure that those home occupations are subordinate to the use of the property as a residence, since we are in residential neighborhoods, ensuring that there's not excess traffic or commercial vehicles in that area in excess of what is normal.
Sure, I guess I was thinking more like phone sales as opposed to, like people actually coming. Like I'm fine saying people can't actually come, but restricting it to online sales and not phone sales seems, phone sales aren't going to create any more traffic to the neighborhood or anything, any more than online sales would.
Yeah, so that's definitely up to the city as far as what the level of sales that you would want to permit as a home occupation. And so I don't know if Adam or the mayor have further thoughts on.
Ms. Holtz?
So a lot of the online sales discussion stemmed from, we have someone who sells knives out of their home. And so that is his home occupation, and it doesn't add any more traffic. You would never know that that person is selling knives out of their home, but it also gave more people flexibility. Some of it happened to be in some of the discussions we had for the wooden bats too, where they had the customers weren't coming there, but they did a lot of the bulk of their sales through online. So it was trying to capture how that occurs without encouraging more traffic to come to a person's home outside of, well, right now everyone's getting things delivered by USPS or whatever. So there's tons of traffic being for delivery purposes, but it's supposed to blend into the neighborhood, so you don't really know what your neighbor, unfortunately, is doing from a professional standpoint. It just looks like your neighbor.
Sure. I'm just thinking of like the businesses that do like Avon and stuff like that, where they're selling out of their home, but they do a lot of phone sales as opposed to they're not really selling things online, but they're also not necessarily having customers come to their home,
It could be added to say, except for online sales and phone sales.
I think you should add it. The reality is, to Catherine's point, the goal here is not to have people coming there to the home every 20 minutes, but if the person is loading up their car and taking off, whether it's Norwex or Avon, wherever it might be, it meets the intent of the neighborhood.
Commissioner Lytle?
Yeah, I like the idea of expanding it from online, but I do think the majority of this is captured through the previous sections that talk about traffic generated. So we would have something to fall back on if, there were suddenly 20 cars every couple of hours coming through that impacted the typical traffic flow in a neighborhood. So, but yeah. Sorry, I think you guys have it covered.
All right, so moving down to indoor sales incidental to light industrial use. This are your existing requirements, again, cleaning them up to eliminate redundancy. Same thing for the light industrial incidental to indoor sales. The opposite or reverse of the last one, just cleaning up for eliminating those references to conditional use requirements. Next is the on-site agricultural retail. So these are your existing requirements. Similarly, moving text to more appropriate sections of the code as it's been reorganized. So next we have outdoor activity and operation permanent. So this would be requirements for any type of use that's going to have outdoor activities and operations full-time. So this would establish a minimum lot size of 5 acres for that type of use. Establish those the time period in which they're allowed to conduct that business, so between 7 a.m. and 9 p.m. requiring that the activities and operations only be conducted to the rear of the side of the primary building on the lot, and prohibiting outdoor activities in front or exterior side yards. And then we have different setback requirements based on the adjacent district. So if the adjacent district is commercial or industrial or agricultural in nature, then you have a smaller setback than you would if it's residential in nature, as well as varying screening requirements based on the type of adjacent use to ensure that you don't have any incompatibility with that type of outdoor use. Any questions on outdoor activities and operations?
Commissioner Lytle?
So, would this be, maybe I'm not understanding exactly, but if we have a tennis court or a basketball court in a public park, would those fall under this, or am I missing the point of what this is attempting to capture in terms of types of uses?
No, that's a great question. So any type of recreation use would be covered under that outdoor passive or active recreation that's up in the institutional uses. So outdoor activities and operations is meant to address commercial uses or industrial uses mainly that might have outdoor activities or operations. So those would be heavier industrial users that are having outdoor activities, or commercial users that have those outdoor activities as well.
Okay, that makes a ton more sense. Thank you.
Okay, so moving down to outdoor dining. So we have two different requirements, one for without alcohol and one for with. So we have with alcohol, these are requirements, I believe, that are based on liquor licensing requirements. So having that area not be able to access it from outside, you'd have to walk through the building, having that fence or wall surrounding the area, having an exit option, but with an exit only gate, so with an alarm, and then any other requirements that the police department or building inspector might have. So these are similar requirements for those without alcohol, but they are less intensive. And then you wouldn't have the requirement that access be through the building. Any questions about outdoor dining? All right. Moving on to outdoor display of merchandise permanent. So this would be another commercial use that would have permanent outdoor displays. So only allowing the display of merchandise that is associated with the existing on-site use, and then not allowing that permanent display area to be within any required yard or parking area. Permanent outdoor display or sales areas shall be surfaced with an improved hard surface. You can't have any partially paved or unpaved outdoor display areas. And then it cannot exceed 10% of the gross floor area of the primary building, unless it's approved as a conditional use. Any questions for outdoor display of merchandise? All right, so we'll move down to outdoor storage permanent. So these are going to be similar requirements that you have for the outdoor activities. So they vary based on your adjacent district. So if you have more intense screening requirements, if you are located, or if you are visible from a property in a residential district, then you would from a property in a commercial district. And then it has, these are mostly screening requirements to make sure that that outdoor storage isn't an eyesore, it's not visible from the public right of way. And of course, shipping containers not located on a truck or located on a truck which is kept in the same parking lot or loading area for more than 30 days would then be considered outdoor storage and would have to comply with these requirements. Any questions on outdoor storage? Nope. All right, so next we have solar energy collection system canopy. So this would be what Epic has over their large parking structure. The the solar panels. And so this is requiring that, or it's allowing for the solar energy collection systems to exceed the applicable maximum height for accessory structures, but not exceeding the height of the primary building that the parking area serves. And then requiring that the minimum height allow clearance for emergency and service vehicles. So next we have ground-mounted solar energy collection systems. So requiring that they be only in the rear yard. It's limiting the quantity of the panels. If you have a lot less than 30,000 square feet, so you're only allowed to have 100 square feet of panels in that instance. But if you have a larger lot, then you have an unlimited amount of panels allowance. Establishing a maximum height of 15 feet and a minimum clearance of 12 inches. And then having all parts of that system set back from side or rear lot lines a minimum of 10 feet. Next, we have our roof-mounted requirements. So this they're allowed on any roof surface of a principal or accessory building and are encouraged to be flush mounted when that's possible, although it's not always possible. And then on residential structures, those panels should not extend beyond 12 inches parallel to the roof surface of a pitched roof or a flat roof, and not extend 36 inches parallel on non-residential structures. And then encouraging that all materials using for racking mounts have a color consistent with that of the roof when possible. Any questions on our solar energy collection system regulations? All right, we'll move down to urban garden. So this is some existing language. I think it's the some of the cultivation language that currently exists in the code, but also adding an allowance for, or if it's, I'm sorry, requiring that if the garden is located in a front or corner yard, it not have any hoop houses, cold frames, or other types of structures. No plant material can exceed 4 feet, so that you have a clear line into the property. And then maintenance requirements in terms of dead plant material interfering with the sidewalk, and then having that setback 3 feet from property lines. Any questions on urban gardens?
Commissioner Tucker.
Do urban gardens just apply to gardens on like business properties, or does this include residential?
This would include residential gardens as well. So it's many communities, and so I believe the existing language for Verona, yes, cultivation areas shall not be located within required front or street yards. So this would be allowing that with certain exceptions or with certain limitations. So it would just be your typical garden that you would have in a residential area or in a commercial setting.
Okay, I'm just thinking, I mean, tomatoes are almost always more than 4 feet tall, and that's a super common thing to plant. So I'm not sure about the 4 foot height requirement. And I guess I'm kind of curious, I mean, everything dies off in winter pretty much here. So is there a real need for the 4 foot height requirement for plant material? I mean, I guess what are we worried about having that this would help with?
That would be only in the front or corner yard. So if your tomatoes are growing in your rear yard or your side yard, then they could be whatever height that they grow into. But limiting the height to 4 feet would keep it in line with the maximum height for fences, and it's a safety issue in terms of visibility and access to a building.
Mr. Sayer?
No, I'm good.
Okay. Sorry, you look like you're ready to say something. Other questions?
I thought about it. I decided I'm good.
Okay. Other questions or comments? All right, seeing none.
All right, so moving on to Christmas tree and pumpkin sales, which will revise to seasonal sales. So this would include outdoor display or sale of seasonal merchandise not otherwise associated with the principal use of the lot, restricting that time period so it can't exceed 42 days per calendar year, and then allowing only a maximum of 20% of parking spaces to be utilized for that use. Any questions on seasonal sales? All right, going down to outdoor assembly. These are some existing requirements, not proposing any revisions here. So going down to outdoor display of merchandise temporary, so this would be associated with the primary use of the lot, allowing that to be located on the sidewalk area at the foundation of the primary use or in a portion of the parking lot that does not exceed 20% of required parking spaces. Any questions for outdoor display of merchandise temporary? All right, so we'll move on to our portable outdoor storage device. So this would be like your pods that you see when people are moving or when people are wanting to store things off site. So here we have a requirement for a permit, although I know we've been discussing with staff whether this will be something that's actually permitted or something that's just regulated through these regulations. So that's a point for further discussion. Restricting the size of the pod, so it can't be greater than 20 feet in length, 8 feet in width, or 8 feet in height. Not allowing that storage unit to encroach on any city property, on the sidewalk, neighboring property, or be placed in the street, and requiring it be sited on asphalt, concrete, or other type of material. So essentially on a driveway. So it would be located between the front of the property line and the rear building line of the principal structure, requiring that visual distance from the side yard property line of 4 feet, so just be a site triangle, and then restricting the time period during which that pod could be located. So it's not a permanent storage structure, but it is for a maximum of 30 days in a year. And then last but not least, we have our short-term rental. So that's our Airbnb or our VRBO. So it would be required that the residential dwelling that is being rented out in that manner be the primary residence of the property owner. So that would restrict homes solely being used as Airbnbs or other short-term rentals. And then having a minimum period of 7 consecutive days and a maximum of 180 consecutive days in any one visit. So of course, these are regulations that can be refined and tweaked as you all see fit, but these are sort of a jumping off point. Any questions on short-term rental?
I have a quick question back on urban gardens again, sorry. Would a raised bed count as a structure, or does that not count as a structure?
There we go. Structures we have currently as like hoop houses, cold frames, or other structures that go more vertically, whereas a raised bed, I believe we could probably add that to the list here. That might be appropriate.
I guess I was going the opposite direction. There's
okay. Yeah, so I think that it would not.
I don't want to ban their raised beds inadvertently.
Right. So it would not include raised beds, just those larger structures that would go on top, like the hoop houses or the frames.
Gotcha. And then I guess as a quick follow-up, like, so I'm thinking of like sunflowers, which some people have planted in their yards, and those get more than 4 feet. But would those be banned? Because 99% of the people in the city aren't, going to care what their neighbors do if they plant a few sunflowers, put a raised beds. But like, there's a small handful of people who will like literally want the city to be out there with a tape measure and cite people if it's like 4 foot 1 inch. And I'd like to kind of avoid those sort of situations that we could get in. And so I guess I have some concerns about the 4 feet. Just, I don't know, just because of past experiences.
So yes, it would restrict the height of even sunflowers or other sorts of flowers that you might have in the front yard. And that really is for safety issues, just as you limit the height of fences in the front yard to 4 feet or 3 feet in some communities, and then have an opacity requirement so that you have a minimum of 50% of that fence be see-through in the front yard. And that really is for safety concerns.
Commissioner Tucker-Long?
Do we have the same rules about planting bushes? I mean, could people plant like 10 feet tall arborvitae bushes? I mean, I'm just thinking my house, we have some gigantic bush in our front yard that's way more than 4 feet tall. I mean, like, is it really specifically going to matter the plants growing in a garden versus the bush right next door to the garden? You know what I mean?
Commissioner Lytle?
Thank you. That was exactly my question. I mean, I understand why we don't want people planting gardens that obscure the front of their house, but how do you do this in a smart way that's not, you know, we have lots of trees that are well over 4 feet tall in addition. So I understand what we're trying to do here. I'm just not clear on why the specific call out needs to be versus like a sentence that says shall not have the effect of obscuring the front of the house or something. I don't know. I know we like to be specific, but in this case, the specificity just seems kind of counter to what we're trying to accomplish.
Mr. Sayre?
Yeah, I think one of the intent is, as Jackie said, it's part of it's the fencing issue, is that, you know, if you're going to cap a fence size, typically, and it doesn't happen often, but I mean, some people have used other types of material to act as a fence per se. I think this is something that we can kind of flag and kind of circle back to. I think part of it's going to depend on what is the definition of an urban garden, and what's going to be classified. Is it the one whatever kind of shrub in front of Beth's house, or is it the 8 trees in front of Pat's house? So that's kind of, or is it something else that's completely in between? So I think maybe we can just flag this and kind of come back to it as staff and Jackie and staff, and we can take a look at this and just see what's the best way to handle this. But I think obviously those concerns are noted, and let's take a look at it and come back to it at a future meeting, if that works for everybody.
I think so. Commissioner Tucker-Long, did you have something to add?
Oh, I was just going to ask if we have any requirements like this right now for landscaping to be less than 4 feet tall. I'm just thinking, there's that house, Adam, just down the street from us, or from both of us, that has a bunch of, like, I don't know if they're yew trees or arborvitae, I'm not really good, but they're a corner lot, and they've used those trees to block off the street side of their house to make a more private yard. I mean, do we have rules about that now? I mean, it's not a fence, but it clearly is a fence. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that house, but if it's in a vision triangle, that's typically when we've gotten involved in other situations in the city. So
Okay.
we've had some situations where people, and it typically happens when there's not a sidewalk, they'll plant, in this case that I remember, they planted arborvitaes right up to the curb, kind of wrapping the corner. We actually went in there and established the vision triangle and forced them to take out about 8 different plantings because it had, long term, it was going to obstruct the vision triangle. So we do have that in place for those vision triangles at corners. Now, I'm sure there have been situations where we probably had complaints about people using shrubbery acting as a fence. I can't recall in my 7 years here of handling one of those. I've dealt with that in other communities where we've had complaints on that, where people will say, well, if you read the definition of what a fence is, in essence, those arborvitae over 10 years turned into a fence because now it has fully obstructed the front view of the house. So, I think as we look at this one and we look at the fencing requirements, I think they kind of somewhat dovetail in the intent. So I see what you're saying, but let us kind of circle back on that. But we do it for vision triangles right now. That I do know for sure, but I'm not sure about other areas.
Jackie, turn it back over to you.
Great. So I think we've gotten through all of the different sections of the articles that we had to go through today. If there's any other questions for the specific use standards or the dimensional standards or use matrix, whatever it might be, happy to take those now.
Questions or comments? Seeing none?
All right. Well, thank you all so much for spending all this time this evening going through these standards in detail. I know it's not the most fun way to spend a Monday night, but it's definitely, all of this feedback is very, very helpful and will ensure that the draft UDO goes through the process more smoothly and really reflects what Verona needs.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie.
All right. You all have a great evening.
Yep, thank you.
All right. With that, we are on item 5, which is adjournment. A motion to adjourn would be in order. Oh, sorry, Mr. Sayer.
Yep, one real quick thing. The next meeting is July 6th. I'm pretty confident we're going to have a meeting. That will be done virtually as well. So we'll do that by Zoom again for the next meeting. And then we'll just kind of revisit those as time goes on here and as this situation evolves. So, but for the foreseeable future, we'll be doing these by Zoom. So, but I do anticipate a meeting in July. So mark your calendars.
Okay. We are on item 5. A motion to adjourn would be in order.
So moved.
Motion by Commissioner Tucker Long. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by Commissioner Heinzen. All those in favor of adjournment, say aye.
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 Opposed, no. And we are adjourned at 8:54 p.m. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Everybody.
Good night, all.